So some time ago, Venerable Children invited us to share stories of our mothers and the women in our lives and what they've been through. Some kind of, personal histories of the women's movement, I guess, is what uh, that would bring up. And I thought a long time about this topic because I wasn't raised by one woman, I was raised by four. So today I just wanted to share a bit about what I learned from each of them and what they've taught me about life, and two, what I appreciate about coming from a lineage of what I consider strong women who have also had to deal with lots of disappointment and grief and, par for the course when you, part of life, yes. So my mother was the first in our family to go to university, and that was a really big deal because my great-grandmother and my grandmother both immigrated from the south of China to Singapore, from a very poor part of China where it was a peasant community. I'm guessing at a time with a lot of political uncertainty. So there's my great-grandmother with two small children. They get on a boat, hope for the best. They didn't have enough money for the passage, and they were let off in Hong Kong. My great-grandfather was in Singapore at the time. They don't speak the language. They're let off in this country. She has two small children. Who knows how she's going to make it? Somehow she found someone who wrote a letter to her husband in Singapore who sent money for her to make that journey across. And in Singapore, my great-grandmother worked as a domestic worker. She was illiterate. My grandmother, too, is illiterate. She was a homemaker from the age of 16. So for them to have kids who almost all of them went to college was like a really big deal, from, that background. And it shows you, too, what was happening in Singapore at the time, a lot of progress and hope and, education. So my mother is not the eldest daughter. She was the second one. And she knew very clearly that her ability to go to college was due to her sister's sacrifice. Her elder sister did not go to college but went to work after high school to support the family. So I think she was always very aware of that her own progress came at, someone else had to make a sacrifice for that to happen. And I think that was always in her mind because she was also a working professional, which was rare at the time. She worked as an administrative assistant in the Navy. And at the time, they were just grateful to have a job, right? And I don't know if there was even maternity leave. So she said after she had me, she had to go straight back to work. And as I think Stephen was saying, his grandmother said for a woman to, have a career, to pursue what she wanted to do, she needed to have a supportive husband, which my mother did. My father was open to her working. He supported that. He was very happy about that. And you have to have good help, right? So that's where all the other women come in, because she had to hire someone to take care of me, right, as a young baby. So she was also one of the first generation of Singaporean women who hired what you might call a domestic helper. There's not really a good, or some people say maid, right, but for me, that person was like my mom, because while my mom had to go to work, she hired someone from the Philippines to come in and live with our family and take care of me, and we had different helpers come in at different times, and they raised us from a young age. So I was very close to the first helper. Her name is Chris. Her life story is its own unbelievable novel, I would say. But in a nutshell, she ran away from home in her teens because she faced a lot of struggle with her family. And over time, I realized it was because she was gay, and openly so, was not afraid of hiding her interest in women. She wore pants to school. They kicked her out because she wouldn't wear a skirt. And her life ambition was to be a police woman, not to become a domestic helper. Her family would have none of this, so she ran away. And she said she was alcoholic and just living this very unhealthy lifestyle until she had a stomach ulcer in her early 20s. Then she decided it was time to make a change, and she cleaned up and tried to get a job in another country. And the first thing she saw was an ad to be a domestic helper in Singapore. So she got up and left and worked overseas. And what I really appreciate is that my mom always made sure we knew she was part of the family. When I was a kid, I would draw family pictures with daddy, mommy, my younger sister, and Chris, right? She's part of the family. I didn't quite know what word to use. And also my parents paid her a fair wage. She always had a weekly day off, and this was kind of unheard of in those days. 2013 was when Singapore passed a law requiring all employers to give their helpers a mandatory weekly day off, or to pay them if they didn't take a day off. So you can imagine, you work for this family day and night, you clean the house, you take care of the small children, the elderly, and you have no day off. To me, that's inconceivable, but from that time, my parents always just, you know, treated her as a, treated her fairly, yeah. And that was that made a huge impression on my mind, I think, just to treat people equally. That was like taken as a given. I was really shocked to learn about how people were treating their workers, you know, when I got older. And also, they always spoke to her with respect. She ate at the same table as us. She was just integrated into our family. And when I saw how other families treated their helpers, then I saw, wow, you know, there's really a whole different attitude out there to people who are different. It just made me think of how, you know, we can talk a lot about equality and things like that, but it really comes in our daily life behavior, and your kids pick that up that way. It's just how you're talking. If you're a parent, how you talk to someone who's different, how you treat people who are apparently different from you and your family, that's what your kids are going to pick up. It's not you sitting there and talking to them about being ethical. Yeah, kids pick it up just from watching behavior. Yeah, so that was Chris, who took care of me for 8 years. And then after 8 years, she had to leave Singapore because the law at the time was that a domestic helper could only have an 8-year work permit, which was actually very traumatizing for many families, right? This person has come and created a strong bond with your kids, and now they are forced to leave. So I was definitely I was traumatized by her departure. It's like, where did Mom, where did she go? Yeah. After that, she recommended her niece to come work for our family. So this became like a family position that got passed on. So her niece came, and she's a young, sparky woman, very talented. And again, because of economic situation, that was her best option, to come and work overseas as a helper to support her family, you know. So you think too of all these women who are trying to take care of their families by taking care of someone else's family, you know, this whole chain of mothers mothering other people's children. Yeah. But she did not have kids. She was a very talented young woman, and my mother really tried to help her grow in her skills. She sponsored all these classes for her to learn sewing and cooking. Her dream was to go back to the Philippines and start a bakery, so she was saving up for that. And she was quite happy working for us, but there came a point where there was a big political case where there was a domestic helper who was arrested for apparently strangling a child and another helper to death. This is the Flor Contemplacion case. Yeah, I was a child at the time, and I'm not sure what the particulars were, but she was accused of murder and eventually hung, given the death penalty. And it was the political fallout was huge. Like, the Philippines was very upset that this happened. Their own embassy was also not actively involved in petitioning for her a fair trial and all that. So who knows whether she was actually guilty or not. But the fallout of it was, for the Filipinos, were very emotional. There was a feeling that it wasn't safe to work in Singapore anymore. So the caregiver who was taking care of us at the time, Chris's niece, decided to go back. That wasn't what she wanted to do with her life, right? So she went back. So we stayed in touch. She never set up a bakery. She couldn't. There just weren't the opportunities in her small town. I believe she wrote to us saying she had breast cancer. We're not actually sure whether that was true or whether she was trying to get us to send her money. That's what we heard later through Chris as well. So it was just very sad to see that, you know, she had all these skills and talents, but there was no way to put them into use. Yeah. And the third woman who came, her name is Lita. She's a college graduate. And again, same thing, from a young age decided she had to find a way to support her family, and her best option again was to work overseas as a helper. And so she spent many, many years working to save money to help her family build a pig farm. And her husband was working as a nurse in Saudi Arabia. I think they would see each other once a year or less. Yeah, that was their whole relationship, you know, these two people, migrants in faraway places. They'd stay in touch over the phone and just trying to raise, I think they had one child maybe, yeah, trying to raise a kid and keep things going for both their families. Yeah. So I think growing up with these women in my life made it very clear to me that, yeah, everything I have in life comes from the kindness of someone else, that many people have to make sacrifices for us to have the opportunities we do. and to do our best to repay the kindness of our mothers. Yeah, and two, having them in my life helped me appreciate how it's not about one person. You're not raised just by your parents. I think we all know this, but it's easy to forget. Yeah, there's a huge network of people who contribute to our well-being, even just within our families. And it gives me a very deep appreciation for what migrants bring to every country. It's very, very hard for me to look at what's happening around the world and to hear at almost every political platform, if you take oh, it's the foreigners who are stealing our jobs. Oh, I just feel it hits home in a very deep way that I don't even know how to respond logically. Because my own grandparents are migrants, right? And I was raised by migrants who have made tremendous sacrifices for their own families. So it's very hard for me to have a balanced perspective on this. It hurts, honestly, when I see in the news, people saying that migrants shouldn't be allowed or things like that. Yeah. So hopefully we all sit and reflect on, the interdependence of our relationships. Then it becomes very hard, I think, to say this is my family, those are other people. We're all just connected like that. And to see that everything that we have comes from the kindness of others and to strive hard to repay that kindness.